My name is Ken Kerschbaumer. I'm with the Sports Video Group, and of course, thank you all for joining us here today. This is a first-time event for SVG. Believe it or not, in 12 years, we have never done an event where we spent an afternoon talking about trucks and the truck ecosystem. So this came out of actually Rob Payne, our sponsor development side, went to the Alliance production meeting, and he said, how come we don't do anything just on trucks? So we are going to do that here today. So we're going to work our way through the trucks. We're going to start with the front bench. Let me just, whoop, where'd it go? Front bench, then we're going to talk about replay operations, then a little break, then at-home productions, which will be a great session, possibly controversial, a little bit of luck. And then we also have the, IP routing. I'll be doing that one a little bit later. And then we close out with a look on lenses, cameras, and replay devices. So we are starting with the front bench, which maybe there won't be front benches in another few years. Who knows where the truck business, all these Remys and all this kind of stuff. So I want to have brief introductions, and let's start with a really big question, which is, what is sort of, from your perspective, what's going on in the front bench area? What are some of your strategies as far as making that area more comfortable for people to work in, more productive? So who would like to start? Who's feeling up for this? Scott?
Sure. We're making things individual workspaces for everybody. There's a lot of emphasis on control over your space, control in a world where there's iPads and other things where people don't want tactile buttons that you can see or touch without looking at them. We're trying to make environments where people can keep their eyes on the monitors, on the action that the story that they're telling, and not necessarily needing to look down at the interface that they need to control to do that. So whether it's an intercom panel or a speaker or a router panel, we want people to have that experience so that you're not taking your eyes off the game, because that's the story you're trying to tell.
Phil?
Yes, I think flowing from that, I mean, the important thing to remember about the front bench is you have producer director coming in, and maybe they're not just in that truck. And so it has to be very familiar. So changes in the front bench, in the monitor wall, the intercom panels and all that have to be done extremely carefully, otherwise you could have somebody walk in and want to walk out, and we don't want that. So we're very judicious about making changes. And in fact, when we're building new trucks, we will bring in the primary clients for that truck and say, okay, sit here, how do you like it? Do you want this little change? And how many quarter inches do you want them changed this way? They're very, very small changes. We also model it. We'll do graphics, 3D layouts where you can see the angle of view and so forth like that. But the changes that we have made, or improvements that we've made, I think changes is probably the wrong word, is we're going to slightly larger displays, 9 images per display, so we can get or 9, or anywhere from 1 to 9 in any monitor. So there's a lot more flexibility for the producer and director to have whatever they want. They can walk in and it's a blank slate, and the software now lets us make the changes pretty quickly. So keep it, so if they want to walk in and be like any other monitor wall or environment they've had before, they can have that. If they want to try some new things, they can. We're also doing curved walls, so you don't have to do this as much. It's just more visible from every angle.
So curved is in the, what's curved? The monitor walls?
So looking from your angle, the top monitor is facing this way, and then it curves around you so that you have better view of each display.
Gotcha. Keith, from Game Creek perspective?
Yeah, so for Game Creek, I mean, basically it's generally always been about consistency and familiarity. So if, as the producer and the director, you walk into truck A one day, and that truck was built in 2006, and you walk into a truck that we built last week, you sit down at that front bench, you've got 52.5 inches between your eyes and the screen. Like, it's all about creating a consistent space. So if you've never seen the truck before, you walk in and you can just get to work.
So Alan, from the Canadian perspective, because obviously in Canada things are different. I think all the trucks are reversed, right? Is that
That's right.
the left side's on the right side and the right side's on the left side? That's from what I understand in Canada. Or the toilet's flush backwards. I can't remember which one it is. That's Australia.
Yes, right.
Anyway, so yeah, how do you guys, I mean, do you approach, well, your trucks take a little bit of a different approach, I think, as far as the front bench area. You still go kind of like the quote-unquote, I don't want to call it old school, but you're not going the length of the truck.
Correct.
You're still going
We're still at the front wall faces towards the rear of the trailer. So much like everyone else has said, we do the same thing, you know, very minor tweaks between generations of the facilities. It's all about improving ergonomics every time. Just get a little bit more comfortable for the production crew, and you know, we want them to feel familiar again. Like Keith said, whether it's a 10-year-old truck or a brand new truck, we want it to be comfortable. We've also kept refining the environmentals. That's what we're finding now is kind of, we got a formula that works for the actual wall layout and the desk space, but it's now making the air conditioning more comfortable, quieter, that kind of thing, because I guess that's the next thing that people can pick at. So.
too cold or too hot. Usually too cold, from what I understand.
Yep.
But so your trucks, this is interesting though, because if an American crew, if one of the other crews who are used to going the other way, when it's your trucks, they would say this feels like an old truck. You know, just because I think for some reason that sort of, to me, that's sort of that at the end of the truck. Do you guys kind of agree? Like, and what's the challenge? How do you get them to do they want to go to the lengthwise or?
A lot of, you know, we do a lot of the visiting feeds across the country, so, you know, we have the American clients in all the time. I don't know so much that we get that, hey, we want it sideways. It may be specific shows there, you know, when they want a bigger wall like that, they'll specifically request, hey, we would have preferred if you built it this way, but for the most part, you know, a lot of these visiting feeds that we're doing, there doesn't seem to be a complaint, so.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it was, you know, in 2008 was when we built Liberty. That was when we made that change from, you know, the front to back monitor wall to putting it into an expando, and that was really all about the monitor wall width. So, you know, the productions are getting bigger and bigger. The big shows are getting bigger and bigger, and the small shows are getting smaller, and so, but with those big shows, you know, we're being asked to really create some really large, capable monitor walls, and so in some recent projects, Encore, Peacock One, and a truck that we're building now called 79. I mean, basically they've got these just sprawling walls that are like 88 inches wider than the front to back walls that we were able to create previously, and that just translates to a lot more images in a bigger space, but you know, basically giving people the tools that they need.
At Mobile Group, I can't actually remember the last truck we built, what we call perpendicular as opposed to the length of the truck. It's pretty compelling. One of the reasons is that you can go higher. If you're going perpendicular, you're limited to the height because the expanders have to come in. And so if you're along the outside wall, even if that side expands, you can get a little more height, and that equals another row of monitors. At the end of the day, it's all about how many images can you put on that wall. You know, start at 100. Don't even talk to us about fewer than 100 images. That's a lot of images. And then on top of that, you want, you know, it used to be that it might be just the TD, the director, and the producer, but now the associate producer and maybe yet a fifth person wants to be in the front bench and not in any of the back benches. So the wider you can make it, the more people you can have on the front bench, the better. So that's why we absolutely 100% adopted the length of the truck approach, which I guess you call the U.S. approach. I don't know what it's like in Europe.
Well, it used to be the entertainment shows, right? Like Denali would. That's kind of people always said, oh, you'd only need that layout if you're doing an entertainment show. If you're doing a sports show, you can get by with this other approach.
Yeah, I mean, some of it just depends on how many graphics people you have, how many people you need to physically get into the control room, and what, you know, workflow preferences are. You know, is really where that came from. But yes, the entertainment clients were the first to do it. They usually have more associate producers, associate directors, and things like that who all are on the front bench.
And with the larger displays, you can say, okay, I want 9 images here now, which you can do reasonably as of a couple of years ago. Or you might say, well, no, I want 4 large images, especially for entertainment, where you just need bigger images to see what shot you like a little bit better.
I know for us too, we really try to stick to the single trailer truck, so having the bigger wall also equates to more weight on the truck, so we have to be cautious of that because we're still bound by that 80,000 pounds of California, so that's something we take into account too.
So as far as, let's roll through some of the technologies that are impacting the future of the trucks. So I think obviously 4K and HDR are two of the big ones, and I'm interested with the HDR. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. As far as the brightness of the monitors, do you want to have 1,000 nits on that monitor wall and people's eyes being burned out, and the trucks just people getting sunburns? So how do you think these sort of new formats will be handled as far as the monitor walls? And does the front bench need to see HDR images while they're producing the show, or can they get by with an SDR, knowing that the HDR show is being delivered to the homes?
From our experience in kind of playing in the space and in trial workflows and stuff, we're finding that the program preview and then the TD monitor are really the critical ones that need to be, that's your reference. That's what the director's seeing, and that's what they know is going out. So that's got to look right. There is absolutely the balance of the brightness and output of the monitor. We had a show that was working with, I think it was a 4K flow, but it had a high-end HDR monitor in it, and the director was complaining in the HD show that the brightness was too much, it was hurting their eyes. So we're taking that in. For the rest of the wall, what we're doing is you want to work in that common format. So if you're doing HDR, whatever curve you're using, you bring everything into that, and now you're going to just put a LUT to the monitor so that it can accurately, or as close as you can, mimic what the HDR source looks like.
Anybody else, as far as?
Yeah, I mean, right now we're using SDR monitors. There is no 1,000 nit reasonably size monitor, 30-inch monitor that is less than $30,000 and doesn't weigh 1 million pounds. So it's just not practical to put it in the monitor wall. So some of that is we need technology to catch up a little bit, to that. We have had people ask they want to, see what HDR looks like, and obviously at a price point we can do anything, but I mentioned at a price point.
Yeah, I think the key place is really to be looking at HDR, obviously in the video shading area. That absolutely, like, those guys are really setting the benchmark for what that video is going to look like. So you can almost get away with even having a producer and director looking at an SDR, a down-converted SDR, as long as if they know they can trust their video people, which, I mean, that can be it's a change in the workflow for sure. But as Scott said,
a little expensive.
Yeah, exactly.
So at Mobile Group, the first question is 4K before we get to HDR. And in 4K, unless you're looking at something over 50 inches, it's very hard to tell the difference between 1080, 1080p, and 4K. So we believe that the production wall, if you're just doing a 4K show, HD images is just fine. We do have a 50-inch display in the truck if you want to see what the 4K really looks like in our 4K truck. But the production wall in 4K, there's really no point. And especially when you want 100 images, and now they're tiny, you couldn't possibly tell. When you get to HDR, it's a little bit more complicated. In fact, HDR is way more complicated than 4K. And we're starting now to do HDR shows, and we're really struggling with these questions. We believe in something that we're calling SDR Plus, which is a derived SDR. So it's not just SDR, it's SDR derived from the HDR, which is SDR Plus. And that looks really very good. It's quite a bit better than SDR. It's obviously not as good as 1,000 nits HDR. And that's probably the best way to build your HDR monitor wall, so long as you do have at least one true HDR display for a producer or a director to see. So I think it's still a work in progress, but we're seeing The push to HDR, I think, is going to happen, and we think this SDR Plus is an approach. The show is still in true HDR, but the monitoring can be in SDR Plus.
So whenever I go into the trucks, obviously there's always new refinements and advancements in the switchers and in the intercoms and in the multiviewers. As far as when you look at that whole ecosystem, I mean, let's start with intercoms. It's always interesting. You guys get very excited over new intercoms and the capabilities. I go to even visiting, Confederations Cup. The big story for Kevin Callahan was just the ability to have these amazingly quick IP-based intercom and communication systems that kind of tie together. So let's kind of roll through a couple of product areas and just kind of see what's kind of on your mind as far as the current state of technology, where you think it might want to go. So like intercoms, what do you guys think of the current state of the intercom business? Are you comfortable with things? Is it all IP? Is that the future for comms? And
I mean, I think the IP has made setup a lot quicker. That part of it is a lot easier. The user interface, though, is the key part of it, and people like what they like. I think that's one of the key things we've learned is people are very comfortable with what they've had. So with the advancements of technology, not wanting the user interface to change. So, we get into speakers or intercoms or whatever it is, people don't want to dial down 62 menus to get to the really cool feature. They just want to be able to press the button and have the really cool feature be there, whatever that is. So I think that's been one of the challenges as we've been asking the technology to do more, but we want it to present itself in a very user interface, simple way.
right, sure.
I totally agree with that. There's what the producer and director and everybody sees right here. What's behind can be IP, but not not the interface. Until we have IP brains, which is probably a couple of years away.
But at a certain point, products go end of life. It happens. So like with intercom panels in particular, we've had the RTS KP32 in our trucks forever. We can't get those anymore. So the user interface they have a new panel and it looks very different, and that's just going to take some getting used to, much like with the newer EVS user interfaces. Like we need to get people on board because that's the only way it's going to be, and the more sophisticated backbone behind it is there to support it.
Yeah, that's a good point about the end-of-life stuff. A lot, like intercom specifically, it's worked the same way it has been for, a decade or beyond. So now that when you're introducing a new product, you have to find a way to support that too from the maintenance side. So, everyone's in the same boat where we have, ton of the same intercom frame. If something breaks, we have parts coming out, the wazoo in the shop there, and to be able to just flip something in. But now you introduce a new product, and now you need to build a stockpile or support that. And then there's training on the operations side for the client or your operators, plus the engineering side of how do you actually glue this stuff together. And the intercom works fairly well in the IP world. It's not overly complicated, but as you maybe change into some of the other technologies, it becomes a problem.
The same sentiment in a different system. I think monitor walls, right? So, in 2011 we started a partnership with Bolin Communications, and they've been supplying our production monitor wall, the majority of our truck monitors for ever since then. And we started with a 20.5-inch 16:10 monitor, and in time that became a 20.5-inch 16:9 monitor, and then most recently we lost a diagonal inch to bring it in at 19.5 16:9, and that's no fault of Bolin's. I mean, we're just all small fish in that space, right? So it's a tricky thing. So most recently, our at 19.5 inches, it was just too small. You either have images that are too small and you can read the UMD, or you make the UMD bigger and you shrink the image, and then either way you're in trouble. So in our most recent project, Bolin's making us a 21.5-inch monitor, which infringes on the the 19-inch rack space. So what we actually had to do to make that work is you basically you put 1-inch spaces between all the rack rail, and then it tiles nicely, and user interface, you don't know the difference.
Right, right. As far as monitor walls, what do you guys rely on Boland? So who are your monitor wall partners, if you will? Do you have a city one?
Boland is predominantly who we use. We tend to do the 30-inch monitors, 30-ish. They're, again, small fish. And
Right, right. So then as far as the, let's go to the heart, when I look at it, well, I guess the heart is the routing switcher, but let's look at the production switcher. And, because that really is, for the technical director, they have a lot of say over what they're looking for. I know also if you talk to some people in the industry, they believe it's important to not necessarily always rely on the same manufacturer, because you want to make sure that there's a healthy ecosystem where you're keeping the Sonys and the Grasses all kind of busy to make sure they're all staying in the game, so they don't say, well, Grass owns the market, so we're out. So how do you kind of approach, or what are when you talk to technical directors, what are they looking for out of their little nook of the world on the front bench, as far as next generation technologies for their production switchers?
I think really, as far as we're concerned, the Grass has really got the market cornered on the U.S. switcher market, and I mean basically that's what drives our. We continue to purchase them because that's what the operators want, and with 4K work in particular, one thing that is kind of the crutch of that whole workflow is, you divide your resources by 4. So, even if we fully outfit a switcher, you're working in a pretty limited space, and as a result, your show needs to be either compromised as a result. You need to scale it back, or you need to get really creative in the workflow. As we move into 2110, that starts to melt away, and a 4K HDR Super Bowl doesn't seem all that far off.
Right, right.
I think switchers is a tough area in the U.S. I mean, the big switchers, Grass Valley is dominant in the market, and that is due to the technical directors who, need the familiarity, need to be able to quickly make effects, take your effects from one truck to the next truck to the next truck. The rest of the world is slightly more open. We're doing a lot of 4K in the UK, and at that time, Sam had a significantly more capable 4K switcher. We put it in the trucks. It was Grass Valley TDs who learned to do the Sam switcher. And obviously as technology is catching up, Grass Valley is changing that. And then when you go into some of the smaller switchers elsewhere, there is a lot of other variety. So, I think it depends on what, and there's different markets of the switchers in terms of keeping things healthy and competition. And the flip side is when you go to studios, Sony switchers actually own that market pretty well, and studio TDs tend to be comfortable with that for whatever reason, but a lot of it comes down to what those people really feel like they need and what they've got, and some of the legacy of what it is. But the reality is they're asked to do things very quickly with zero notice, and they need to be able to go from any scenario to any scenario. So being comfortable with the tools that you're having to do that, it's challenging.
Right, right.
It is, I totally agree with Scott. It's very hard to, in the United States, in the sports area at least, if you have a switcher that's not familiar to the TD, which means if you don't have a Grass K-frame, TD is going to make a U-turn on the way back out of it. I mean, just as fairly recently, I had a complaint that we still have, I don't know, couple of trucks that have Calypsos instead of Cayenne K-frames, and some of the TDs are saying, well, we're not comfortable with Calypso anymore. Not because it's old, but because they don't know how to run it anymore. And it's very limiting.
Muscle memory's not there anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're the same way. K-frame across our fleet where we can, a couple of Calypsos as well, and we get the same requests about the Calypso. Not so much a comfort factor, but the shows have grown so much over the past years that they're now hitting the limits of the switcher. Same thing when you look at 4K. we, again, we thought we had an opportunity if we were going to make a change to a new platform, we could evaluate everything, and we did. And there's other platforms have great usability and great feature sets that maybe aren't in what we currently have, but it came down to inputs. And when you're talking of quartering your resources, you need every bit, because the shows, again, we don't want our clients to be impacted when they're doing a 4K show and saying, no, you have to make it smaller. They want to work the same way because that's what they're used to and that's what they expect, because the HD is still paying the bills. It's, that's where all the viewership is. So, we've had to actually change the TD position a bit to increase the number, like some extra router panels for sub-switching and, kind of back to the days of the old GRAS 300s. And that's complicated workflow as well for our operators. It's not just hit the button and the source is there. It's a couple extra maneuvers. The manufacturers have been good working to streamline some of that, but it's definitely a workflow change, and it's a bit impactful.
Another thing that we've done similar to that is introduced some protocol translation to introduce macro switching so that you can have the switcher itself control the router so that you can change what is actually feeding the switcher, and that is open some new roads.
So, well, Phil, you mentioned the director and the producer comes in, and so everybody has their. This is the challenge. Should the front bench area go through a massive transformation? I remember Lou Borelli was up here on stage, 10 years ago, talking about how he envisions one day with all the kids playing the Xboxes and the video game controllers, that sort of a control interface maybe someday would be in the TD area. We mentioned the touch screens earlier. But you have people who their career, let alone whether they want to learn it, it's really about the fact that, like the EVS operators, and it goes back to nonlinear editing and switching from one platform to another. If I'm 15 years experience on an Apple and then I go to Premiere, I'm no better than the kid who has no experience on Premiere. My 15 years goes out the window in a strange way. So how do you get the comfort level to, first of all, should the front bench change? Is everybody comfortable with the environment? Does it need to go big through a transformation? What's being lost in not saying, let's do this from scratch and go all touch screen and
as a truck builder, we'd like nothing better than things to migrate to iPads. Everything's way cheaper. We could build a truck for a fraction of the price if we could just make everything virtual or some kind of iPad thing. And we've tried a few things and they get rejected. I mean, the recent one was on the EVS, right? The LSM Connect system, and so instead of the whole VGA screen, now you have, man, that didn't work for a minute. We got terrible pushback on that. So changes in that area come slowly. You got to remember, it's all about speed. Not in every sport, but in a number of sports, when the producer and director are calling for something, they do not want to wait. And so what counts is the device that does it the fastest, and that's generally not a touch screen kind of device. Where we might see some changes is, and I don't know if you're going to get to this, Ken, is for at home. If a truck has to be an at-home device, an at-home truck doing or Remy or whatever you want to call it, or home run production, and also a regular truck, because they all do. I don't think there's hardly any pure Remy or pure at-home trucks, right? Because as soon as that show is over, you got to go do a regular show. Maybe in that environment, people will be more accepting, okay, this truck has to do dual purpose, so maybe we have to find some economies for the regular production, and that may mean some more other kinds of devices. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, let's got about 20 minutes left, so I want to talk about the Remy thing, because we'll have a conversation later today about at-home productions, which will focus on what people have been doing in terms of applying at-home productions. But I'm curious from your perspective, because you're obviously, I don't want to equate it to the 1800s or 1900s with, are you in the railroad business or the transportation business? But are you in the truck business or in the production platform business? So you mentioned, Super B, when NEP introduced the Super B, that was an ultimate flexible space. Can these A units and the front bench areas go to becoming really super hyper flexible with software design and not having hardware in it? Because that's the problem, is the cost, I'm guessing, is in the hardware.
Yeah, Absolutely. Actually, software is starting to cost more money. One of the trends we're seeing from the manufacturers is they're actually putting more cost toward the software because the hardware is getting cheaper, it is getting commoditized. Probably a different panel.
Yes.
But I mean, absolutely, it can, it is, and it will become a more flexible space. We'll talk about it more later on the at-home production panel. But there is the concept of operators that can sit anywhere, to operate and be part of the production. It's really going to be about supporting the production, and that's what I think we can't lose sight of, is that we're here to support the telling of a story. And whether the people, wherever they are telling that story, that's what we need to do. And I think the user interfaces will change. I don't think it's going to be a, day one we're using buttons, day two we're using an iPad. I think we're going to find that there's going to be certain things that iPads are going to creep into the switcher user interface or into the replay user interface, and people are going to gradually get more comfortable with it. We're going to have a generational turnover of people, of crew, and they're going to be more comfortable with that. I equate it to when I switched from a PC to a Mac, going from Outlook to Mac Mail, and then if you ever tried to go back, it's difficult. And it takes time and it takes getting comfortable. It's going to be the same thing with these interfaces as people go through it. And also we're going to be able to do something with those newer interfaces that we can't do now that's necessary for a show. I don't know what that is,
Yeah.
but there will be something.
Yeah, you don't want to go to a touchscreen interface simply to replicate what you're doing with the current interface. It has to be, but I don't even know how you could use that in a different way than.
The big problem is, even if you assume that there's going to be some amount of Remir at home, back to what I just said a moment ago, you need trucks to be able to do both. And if you have a truck that can do a full-blown production, well then how much less can you charge for that same truck to do an at-home production? Obviously, the clients want to pay a lot less for a truck where they're not using the switcher or they're not using this or that. So we think that technology offers some solutions to that. We're looking at a few of those. I mean, we've done quite a few at-home shows of varying sizes. But we think that there will be a new sort of a second generation of at-home that we're working on, where a lot of the expensive equipment still stays in the truck, and the back at home, which is back at the network control rooms or wherever those are, the capital expense is much, much lower, but so we're all working on the interface between the two. Is that? I'm trying to be maybe a little vague here, but I think there's some tremendous opportunities there, which will actually be way better than what we're doing now, and we've got schematics and that, and how we're working. That's our focus. And then the truck can go back and forth between an at-home and a regular show on a day-to-day basis. And the biggest value of at-home is in markets where there's very little crew. Some pro markets and some college markets where the biggest, the reason for doing at home is mostly a cost. So if you got to look at the high cost places of doing regular shows and design for that.
I think you've already invested all this money into building these full-up trucks too. So if you can squeeze in a couple extra dates for at-home or Remy production in the schedule, it makes a lot of sense. You look at Canada and the size of the country, and if you're doing, we're based out of Toronto, but if you're doing a production in Prince George, British Columbia, that's the middle of nowhere. It doesn't make sense to drive a truck from Toronto across the continent to do the show. You lose all your margin on that. So if you have something sitting out west, then you just send it up. And if it happens to be a full show or full-up truck for that purpose, then I guess if it still makes business sense, then why wouldn't you do it?
I think kind of the tough part in dealing with at-home productions in general as a truck company and rolling out a dedicated platform for that is that everybody's doing it just a little bit differently. And so, you can take, what's made sense for us is you do take the full-blown truck, because that at-home production is guaranteed to fit within that platform, right? So, you can pick up work from point A to point B, which is a lot of that work. But then what we've also started to find is that if you pick up, some more an at-home sort of package where the venues are pretty consistent and one truck is going to be doing that over and over and over again, that's where a dedicated truck sort of kind of starts to make sense. So what we found...
A Remy dedicated truck.
Well, right, exactly. So what we found is, we don't necessarily want to build a dedicated at-home truck, but we've got a whole pile of generic B units and edit trucks and things like that that are really well positioned to, with very little modification, slide into that role. And so if, GCV B1, B2, B3, edit 1, 2, 3, or coming soon, edit 4. If those trucks need to go and meet up with a whole pile of our A units to do the biggest show the world has ever seen, they're ready to do that because that's what they were built for. But then if you need them to go and do this dedicated Remy show, we've got a base platform that it can really be built off of.
Since this is front bench tech panel, one of the beauties of at home is that you can replicate the whole front bench in the control room. So instead of the front bench, all those monitors and everything being in the truck, they can be at home. And that part's actually pretty easy. What you can't do too well is super slow-mo. And we have a lot of trucks now that have run routinely with 4 super slow-mo systems. So and each one of those at 6 times is like 6 cameras. So if you're trying to do a 10 camera show and 4 of them are super slow-mo, you're really doing a 20 camera show. And now you're talking about some pretty serious bandwidth. And super slow-mo has become such an integral part of our industry, and such a beautiful part, so rewarding for the viewer at home. I don't think anybody wants to lose that.
Right. I think ESPN has been testing that, supposedly, I've heard. Rumor, sorry.
We've tested it too.
Yeah.
It's just not so easy.
Right. So what is the front bench? When I envision the front bench area in a Remy truck, I don't see a front bench. Am I missing something? I mean, what will be the front bench in a Remy truck?
We've done, much like everyone else here, a smaller trailer that we've kind of outfitted and modified with a little bit of effort to make for Remy. And the front bench ends up looking more just a multi-viewer monitor wall, because you still want a position to see everything that's coming in and going out. So I think it's just a scaled down version. Maybe in this case I don't think there's a full switcher in the truck, right? But that stuff goes away. But it still has some of the similar feeling and characteristics of a big truck.
I think it might have a front bench. I mean, the reality is that a lot of the savings right now from at-home productions is travel. So if you're a director or AD or somebody happened to live near or in the city that the game was at, rather than flying them to somewhere else, putting them in a hotel per diem and all of that stuff, to have them in the truck would give you more flexibility and a more flexible way to save money. And how all of that works, being separated, producer and director from the TD. I mean, there's lots of operational considerations, but as people get more comfortable with it, it used to be that you needed a window into the audio room to see the audio guy. That has gone away. We no longer do that. We do spy cameras, and there's all of these other things. Graphics used to have to be, in the control room. Then it was graphics needs to be in their own room. So we've evolved to all of these things. I think that it could, continue to evolve.
Right, sure. So as far as audio in general, I mean, it's not on the list, and actually we had a separate half hour for audio, but as we know, there's a DTV audio group meeting going on downstairs all day, so we said audio guys have their own thing. So as far as audio within the relationship with the front bench area, how do you kind of approach where that sits in relation to the front bench? There are some people who like glass windows so you can see both back and forth. We have this Atmos thing coming down the pike, so we're talking in the audio room, you want to have 22 speakers or something like that. But no, so what's going on with audio, the audio side of things, the consoles and the monitors and?
I mean, I think the consoles, it's similar to everything else. More is better. Where, we used to have, 320 channels was more than you ever needed. Now, if you don't have 1,000, you've got a tiny audio console. So that just more, we still seem to favor faders. So, I mean, I think you've still got individual things. In Europe, people deal with 10 levels down on their faders, and they end up with a smaller audio console and fewer physical faders, but more layers. In the US, we tend not to really like that. We want to be able to grab everything at the top 1 or 2 layers. So that's just, a feel. There's more to listen to. So there's, more other speakers. I think one interesting issue we ran into several years ago at this point, but the quality of the Wohler speaker actually got too good. And it was confused with being in the main monitor speaker, so keeping that a little tinny probably is helpful. Just one of those little advancements in technology that wasn't so helpful.
Right.
Actually, in the audio area at home, I think there are some interesting prospects for at home. There are still some at home productions where they want to see a big CalRec audio board, and if they want that, that makes it tougher to create the strictly at-home platform because the audio board is so expensive. But there are other projects we're involved in where they're using the new Lavo system, which remotes the audio very nicely. So I think audio is an area where we're going to see a lot of progress for at home.
Sort of depends on what the workflow need is for the particular at-home production, because if you need to be able to create the IFB mixes and mix minuses and things like that, then yeah, you sort of need the big audio console and an A1 to do that. But there are some other workflows that kind of cast some of the redundancy pieces of it to the side, where you can get away with a smaller scale system.
What about like automated submixing? There's all these kind of new tools out. I think Lavo has this tool that may be used at a certain event this summer, possibly to do some automated submixing of the in-house effects, if you will. Where do you kind of see automation tools fitting into the front bench area and the audio area?
I mean, I think automation has its place. I think at the same time that we've all seen a TD take a camera that the director didn't call because it was a better shot. It was the unexpected shot, but it actually really added something to the story. Same thing we've seen the cameraman look outside their viewfinder, catch something that they weren't seeing otherwise, and they were able to go down to it. So I think there is automation that is going to do a certain amount of it, but I think there is still a place for human beings deciding that there isn't something that is in a rhythm, because most sports do have a rhythm, which is where the automation does come in and does work. But, a lot of times it is the unexpected that actually captures the viewer.
Yeah, I think that on the Tiger Woods on the 16th hole at the Masters, that ball that hung on the lip and then went in, that the director was calling for him to cut, and the TD was just like, I ain't gonna cut, and he kind of held it, and then ball went in, and then the TD got a big bonus. But
Right, but in AI, they would have cut away from that because
right, exactly.
And we would have lost that.
Right.
Yeah, to a certain degree too, people are becoming automated. When you do that same job for so long, it's muscle memory, right? That's why the tactile buttons and everything have to be in such a place, because people, could you tell them, if you asked them what key combination you hit, they probably couldn't tell you, but if you gave them a keyboard, they could press it for you. So, to a certain degree, there is some kind of human automation, but, we still have our brain that allows us to make those judgment calls. Right.
Well, I think I was talking with someone earlier. I mean, this is where we're going to have this interesting challenge for the front bench, which is, because I've talked to some people who do big time soccer, and they're like, you know what, we can automate a lot of this stuff. Yeah, I'm going to lose some of the emotion, but the cost-benefit analysis makes you say, well, we'll have to sacrifice the emotion in order to keep doing these games. So, but you're going to have this whole push and pull of conflict of, does the automation allow for more creatives to spend more time being creative and looking for the artistic, or do you lose the artistic completely and just rely on simple cuts based on artificial intelligence and the IBM Watson and
You know, it's kind of like the Remy model, right? Where, you know, when that was first kind of announced and, you know, said people are going to be doing that, there's a lot of pushback, right? But in the end, you know, if something like the automation allows you to save money so that you can produce more content because your budget's the same, but it's just how you allocate it, maybe there's a benefit to that. You know, maybe it's not the tier 1 level, it's down a couple where, you know, you have rights and you still want to get it on air. And again, like that remote production model.
Right.
But even maybe a tier down.
Like those cross-country meets for Lehigh versus Bucknell that have to be broadcast on TV, and no one's watching, but that's, yeah. So we have 2 minutes left. So as far as, so we have the 4K on the future, HDR. It looks like in general, a lot of the trucks are going to be able to, we're getting to that, everybody wants one truck, no side-by-sides, right? Potentially 1080p is the big thing here in the States. Haven't yet seen any broadcasts with it yet, but so what do you see the big trends impacting front bench design over the next 12 to 18 months? Is there anything? Or is it because the operator is going to keep things the same because they don't want any kind of change as far as how they do their jobs?
It's about improving, not changing.
I think there's going to be a push-pull, you know, with as budgets are adjusting, shrinking, you know, to find efficiencies, and some of that may come in changing workflows versus what the other is. And I think that technology and user interfaces are coming to a point where saying, no, that's not possible, or I can't do that, you start to sound a little silly, may not be the right word, but certainly not welcoming of change.
Right, exactly. Excellent.